Welcome to REM Reward, the podcast that explores the secrets of sleep and psychology. I'm your host, Ryan, and in each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of sleep and other topics such as mental well-being and personal growth. If you want to unlock your full potential and receive the rewards that come with understanding the power of sleep, you're in the right place. To discover more tips and insights on improving your sleep and overall well-being, visit our website and explore our other episodes at remreward.org. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the REM Reward Podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, Lisa Lewis. Lisa is a renowned journalist and author who has made a significant impact in the field of sleep health, particularly for teens. She's the author of the book, The Sleep-Deprived Teen, which delves into the science behind adolescent sleep and advocates for later school start times. Lisa was instrumental in passing California's landmark legislation on healthy school start times, making her a leading voice in the movement to improve sleep health for teenagers. We are thrilled to have her on the podcast today to share her insights and expertise with us. Okay, so could you just start by telling us your background in journalism and what inspired you to focus on specifically sleep and particularly teenagers in sleep? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted that you are interested in this topic because it is
Thanks for
absolutely
being
a
on.
passion of mine. So for me, it all sort of came together because of my role as a parenting journalist as well as my role as a parent. So I have two kids. My youngest just graduated high school a year ago. And so for me, the whole story really begins in 2015, because that was when my oldest, my son, was just entering high school. He was going to be a freshman. And our local public high schools at that point started at 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Which was incredibly early. Yes, it was earlier. I think way back in the day, my high school started at 8, which felt early even then. But fast forward here to 2015, my son is about to start 9th grade, and all of a sudden he's going to have the earliest start time that he has had all the way through his school career. So as I mentioned, I'm also a parenting journalist, and the topics that I cover really center around the intersection of education, public health, and parenting. And so this obviously hits all three of those areas. And so my curiosity was piqued. We started this new school for him. I was the one driving him there. So I was acutely aware of the impact as well, because we were leaving the house at 7:10 every day.
Right.
So
Wow.
I started looking into it. Yeah, because, sort of naturally wanting to know, why is this happening? Because it was not an easy transition. There are a few teens who jump out of bed at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, raring to go, and super excited to be at their desks at 7:30. And, my son was certainly in that category. He was doing it, but he was really kind of quiet on the way to school. It was kind of obvious he wasn't fully awake. It wasn't like an optimal situation. So that's what propelled me into looking into this issue. And so I started looking into it and realized this had been going on for years, literally decades, this whole issue of looking at start times and the mismatch with teens. The first school actually to change its start time was back in 1996. So, fast forward, there it is, 2015. I start looking into the issue. One thing that was particularly fortuitous is that the body of research on the issue was really hitting a critical mass at that point. So again, back in 2015, the previous year, 2014, the American Academy of Pediatrics had released its influential policy statement on the issue, stating that middle and high schools should start no earlier than 8:30 because of the implications for sleep, and then for all of the ramifications that has on health and well-being. So that was sort of the backdrop. So I happened to sort of, enter into this conversation at a point where it really was hitting this critical mass. So I start writing about this issue. As I mentioned, I had written about other similar issues related to education, et cetera. I think my first piece came out his freshman year, but it was an article I wrote at the beginning of his sophomore year that actually ended up kind of being the spark for our California law. And that was an op-ed that ran in the Los Angeles Times. I should back up and say all this was taking place in Southern California. So I wrote an op-ed that ran in the Los Angeles Times called "Why Schools Should Start Later in the Day." And it literally was read in the newspaper by one of our California state senators whose district
Wow.
is in Los Angeles. Right. I mean, you can't script it, to turn out that way, but it just so happened he literally read it in the newspaper. And at that point in time, he also had a high schooler. And it just so happened their high school was having conversations about the start time. So it was just sort of a matter of perfect timing. He literally reads it in the paper and then decides it's an issue he wants to look into further and possibly introduce a bill on. And that's literally what ended up happening. So I got pulled in even before the bill was introduced. The bill got introduced in 2017. And I got kind of swept up in that whole journey because I had been trying to do some work locally in my district, not really making headway. All of a sudden, this opportunity, arose. And so I jumped in, and that ended up being this 2.5 year legislative journey. I won't bore you with all the details, but in the end, the bill got signed into law. So that didn't happen until 2019. And then there was a 3 year implementation window. So that law, which was the first of its kind in the entire country, at the state level, setting minimum allowed start times for middle and high schools, finally went into effect in July of 2022. And then I ended up writing a book because I was so immersed in all of this that also came out in the summer of 2022. So that is sort of my origin story of how I got involved in this. It has been now almost a decade that I've been immersed in all of the research, and so that's kind of how I got into it, and what led me to where we are right now.
That's amazing. It's really amazing. I love to hear that. Yeah. And I guess going on to that, like your book, The Sleep-Deprived Teen, has really been a major influence in, I guess, sleep health advocacy. So I guess you kind of touched on this, but like what led you to write this book and what were some of the most surprising findings you came across during your research?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did not start out with the intention of writing a book. As I mentioned, I have, written about various topics related to teen health over the years that have not thus far turned into books. In this particular case, because I ended up being so immersed in this topic over 2.5 years, from the time, it dates back to 2015, but that legislative process was 2017 to the end of 2019. And during that, I was just so immersed in all of the research. I was really pretty active throughout that process. I was testifying at the state capitol on behalf of the bill. I was in regular contact with the major researchers around the country. The physician who authored that policy statement for the AAP was one of the people who supported the California bill and now law, for example. So I was in regular contact with all of these medical experts in the field, staying on top of all the research. And because I was so immersed in it, that was sort of then how the book ended up being like a natural outgrowth of that. And there really wasn't anything like that out there. I sort of wrote it for the me of 2015, really primarily for parents. I think it's probably relevant for students too,
Yeah.
because it does have a lot of information about how to improve your sleep. But it was sort of a primer for parents who were just, finding themselves perhaps in this situation with a school that starts too early. Regardless, any parents of teens or tweens notice that these sleep patterns change massively, as kids enter adolescence, and to kind of explain why that is, to kind of help provide that foundation of information, to go through all of the various implications of what happens when you are sleep deprived, and then to provide specific tools and strategies to help. So that was sort of the impetus for the book. And as I mentioned, that did come out in 2022.
Right. Wow. That's really great to hear. And yeah, what biological changes occur during adolescence that affect the sleep patterns, and how do these impact like cognitive, emotional, and physical health? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and they affect all of that and more. And I'm sure you probably noticed this too. Like, you may have been an early riser when you were 4 or 5, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, fast forward 10 years, and that is not the case.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a parent, it's one of those things where your kid, when you have like a toddler who's up at the crack of dawn, that is not something you want. And then all of a sudden you've got the totally opposite situation, and that is not just because suddenly teens become lazy, and suddenly they're like, oh, now I want to sleep in. There is actually, legit biological underpinnings to
Yeah.
this. So what happens is essentially as you enter adolescence, there is a shift in your internal timing, your sleep-wake rhythm. It's called the circadian rhythm. And that's kind of what governs when you feel sleepy, and therefore when you go to bed, and when you no longer feel sleepy and when you wake up in the morning. And there's a hormone that our brain produces, melatonin, similar to the melatonin you can buy over the counter, but it's actually a endogenous hormone. It's something that your brain releases, and that hormone primes you to start feeling sleepy. So what happens is the timing of when that hormone is released actually shifts later as you enter adolescence. So you're no longer feeling sleepy as early as you used to. So that's why, a little kid, they can fall asleep at 7:30, no problem. Teenagers not can fall asleep at 7:30 or 8 or even 9 unless they're just so exhausted.
Right.
So that's what's happening, kind of under the hood, if you will. So there is this biological underpinning for why teens don't feel sleepy until later at night. So just based on that, you don't naturally begin to feel sleepy until about 11 o'clock at night. And then, there's also the reality of everything else, all the external forces. You've got homework, you've got socializing, you've got, sports, you've got all the other things. So many teens are not going to bed even close to 11 o'clock. But nevertheless, they're not going to feel sleepy until about 11, regardless,
Right.
just because they're
Yeah.
on internal timing. Then in the morning, melatonin also does not begin to subside as early as it used to. So that's why you're not feeling ready to wake up as early
Right.
as you used to. So there's that piece. The other piece, though, is that you look at how much sleep teens need. And this was something I felt like really wasn't, and probably still isn't as widely understood as perhaps it could be. Because you always hear like 8 hours, right? It's like this
Yeah.
magic number. Well, that's great for me as an adult. For an adult, it's 7 to 9 hours is the range. And so that's right there in the middle. But until you're 18, you actually should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep
Right.
every night. So when you hear people talking about 8, that's the minimum.
Mhm.
And then it usually, they're not even hitting that. And so then you really are getting into an issue of chronic sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
The last piece that is also part of this, we're talking about how at night often teens aren't able to go to bed anywhere at a reasonable hour because of everything going on. Well, in the morning, the thing that typically drives what time they have to wake up is what time school starts. So if you're left to your own devices, you're probably going to want to wake a lot later than what time your alarm is going off, because you have to get up because you've got to get dressed and take the bus or drive or whatever and be sitting in your seat when the first period bell rings.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a problem, I think, those really early school starters, and I'm really happy to see that they're pushing back recently. And I guess going along with that, like, could you share any success stories or case studies where improved sleep habits or later school start times made a really significant difference, and what impact those changes held on the communities that had them implemented?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are success stories from around the country, and we're focusing primarily on the U.S. because the U.S. does tend to have much earlier start times
Right.
than. Well, I shouldn't say globally, but in general, my focus has been U.S. start times, which are earlier than, say, countries in Western Europe, but often are later than countries in Asia. So there
Mhm.
are also, many other countries where things like this could, be implemented. But looking just at the U.S., which is also where the research on this started, literally back in the mid 70s. So the first school to do this was 1996, and they did have positive results. They did pre and post surveys looking at the amount of sleep kids were getting, et cetera, looking at grades. And those kind of, the research varies based on the researcher who's doing it, what their particular aims are. So it's not always necessarily exactly the same thing that's being studied. But what I can tell you is that this has been done in literally hundreds of different communities around the country. And I don't have an exact number because there's no central repository of that to say This is the list of schools that
Right.
changed their start times. However, there continue to be these great success stories. So the most recent one that I'm aware of was actually 2017. So this was in a suburb of Denver called Cherry Creek, which is actually a pretty large area. It's like 55,000 kids in the district. So this
Wow.
is not like a tiny district.
Yeah.
So they used to start their high school at 7:10, and then they moved it to 8:20. So obviously like a huge difference. And
Yeah.
what they found when they went back 2 years later was kids were getting about 50 minutes more sleep, 45 to 50 minutes more sleep every single school night, which is huge.
Hmm.
So that's probably the most recent, one that is, done on a broad level. And when I say recent, as I mentioned, happened in 2017. Usually these studies, then they wait a couple of years, then they come
Right.
back.
Yeah.
So they did that in 2019. Then, of course, we had the pandemic. So I mean, it's been a little tricky
Yeah.
to get more recent studies because somehow they're going to have to account for that if that happened in the midst of the change. Nevertheless, you look at something like that, the kids were getting 45 to 50 minutes more sleep.
Hmm.
They also found, though, this was interesting. They went back and did another study just looking at the teachers. The teachers were getting more sleep too.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
uh, yeah. So, I mean, time and time again, when schools have changed their start times to move later, when they've gone in and done the research, they have found that yes, kids get more sleep.
Yeah. That's amazing. And then beyond start times, like if there's anything you have in mind, like what else can schools do to promote healthy sleep among students while, like, I guess balancing extracurriculars, academic demands, socializing, and all that?
Yeah, yeah, that is such a good point because start times are a key piece of this whole, equation, but
For
they are
sure.
not the only piece. So again, just looking, first at the start times, then I'll get to the rest of your question. If you have to be sitting at your desk at 7 a.m., which is literally the required the start time in cities like Las Vegas and Nashville,
Hmm.
even today, maybe 7:05. But like that is first period. That is not
Yeah.
zero period. And you have to, and if you're not there, you're absent or tardy or truant or whatever. I mean, like you literally have to be there by 7 a.m. So if
Right.
you're in a district that's starting, you know, at some really, really early time like that, it makes it virtually impossible for you to get those 8 to 10 hours.
For
Because if you
sure.
back it up, I mean, you'd have to go to bed at some ridiculously early time, which just isn't feasible because you're not feeling sleepy that early. And to your point, there's all this other stuff going on. I mean, there are very few high schoolers who are like, okay, I've finished everything and I'm naturally tired and it's 8:30, so I'm just going to go turn in.
Yeah.
So that's a key piece of it, but it is not, you can't just do that and say miraculously everything will be fixed. It's an essential, it's a necessary but not sufficient,
Mhm.
piece of the
I
equation
like
if
that.
you
Yeah.
just do that and you don't look at anything else. All the rest of those things play into. So I wish I had like a quick like fix for it because there really isn't. I mean, I think the answer is it depends based on what are the other factors that are playing in. And usually it is some combination of academics, extracurriculars of like sports, what have you, including outside activities, not just school ones, but like club sports, et cetera.
Right.
It could be having a job. It could be other family responsibilities. It could be the additional pressure of feeling you need to be taking additional, extracurricular type things in preparation for college. So that the specific mix varies, based
Mhm.
on the school, based on the family, et cetera. Um, so what I do, because I go in and I talk to schools and students and parents regularly about this exact issue, is I kind of go through all of those different pieces because I think what happens is people don't always um, think about the cumulative impact of the time that all those activities take and where's that time coming from. It's coming from that, the sleep piece.
Mhm.
Like if you think of it as a pie, you've got your circle 24 hours. And this is actually something where you can literally sit down and kind of sketch this out yourself if you're trying to figure out, well, where's my time going? So you look at how many hours are you in school? That's going to be a portion of the pie. And then there's going to be a portion which is all the hours you spend on homework. But figuring that out, you really have to think about what are the classes you're taking. So
Mhm.
if you are taking a heavy, advanced course load, each of those classes is going to have, its own homework requirements. So
Sure.
you really have to be realistic when you sketch out how many hours of homework do I really have every night when I, add up for all these classes I'm taking. So there's that piece. Then there's all the extracurricular stuff. So in school, if you're in band or speech and debate or student government, whatever, sports, then there's the club sports piece, any other lessons you're taking outside of school. How much time does that take? And then some kids are still having a job, there's
Hmm.
that. Then, okay, so you're already all the way around here, right? So then there's got to be a little piece for like sitting down, catching your breath, being
For
able to
sure.
eat meals, being able to shower, having a
Yeah.
little time to downtime, maybe being able to socialize. And then you get back to here, and that's sleep. So if you find that all of that, you add all that up, and maybe you literally haven't left an 8 to 10 hour window, that's kind of a sign that something's amiss. Something is out of balance there.
Mm.
And so you have to figure out, how are you going to get to 8 to 10 hours? Because without that, it is impossible then for you to get enough
Yeah.
sleep.
Right.
And then that just kind of spirals. So, what that looks like is, I think that's the first step, is trying to analyze what is it that's getting in the way, and then trying to address that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's hard. I mean, as you know, you're in the thick of it. Like, you probably are taking AP and advanced classes, and
Hmm.
you're prepping for the SATs, and you're doing whatever extracurriculars you're doing. You've got your own sense of what you need to do. And I don't mean that to be like, patronizing at all, but it's sort of like, I mean, literally, you don't need it to stay alive, but you need it
Right.
because
Yeah. Of
that's the
course.
perceived need in order to be able to, meet your goals. You, and not just you, but a high schooler has the expectations, of themselves. They have their family's expectations. Their peers are also a big piece of this. There can be sort of this sense of, oh my God, I was up until 3 a.m. studying. Oh, really? Well, I was up until 4.
Right.
That sense like that. Um, so it's hard. It really is.
Hmm.
And yet, at some point, you have to sort of realize sleep is not optional. You can't keep like adding on and adding on and adding on and expecting there's no impact on the fact that you keep scraping away and making this a tinier piece of the pie.
Sure. Yeah.
So, there isn't like a magic answer, because it is hard. I mean, there is, legit like this pressure to do more and achieve more because you are trying to get into a good college. But I think it's also important to step back and recognize that there's a point of diminishing returns. You can be staying up exhausted and trying to read something, and you can read the same thing 5 times and
Right.
nothing is sinking in. So there's that. Like, it does affect learning, and we can get into that more in depth, but it also affects everything else in your life. I mean, it affects your emotional well-being, it affects mental health. And really everything. When you're talking about mental health, it exacerbates. Like, if you've got depression, anxiety, even suicidality is affected by lack of sleep.
Yeah.
But even just your daily demeanor, your emotional resiliency, your ability to wake up in the morning and feel good and be able to greet the day and have kind of a positive outlook and have positive interactions with people, like, all of that is affected by sleep. And then on the much more serious end, things like suicidality, that's real.
Hmm.
and
For sure.
and part of it is, it exacerbates mental health issues when you're sleep deprived, but it also um, decreases sort of the checks and balances in place against risky behaviors and impulsive behaviors. I mean, so these may be things that are impulsive, and it's a tragic thing, obviously. Mental health issues are obviously very complex, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but sleep is a key piece of that. So, if one goes in to a medical, provider to talk about mental health, that's one of the first things they're going to ask you is
Yeah.
how much sleep you're getting, because that's sort of the low hanging fruit of what you want to try and address first. Because without that, everything feels more difficult.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent, but
No.
sleep, I mean, I tell people, sleep literally, there's not one single thing you do better as a result of being sleep deprived.
Yeah, for sure. I really think it's about changing that perspective. Yeah, I think I like what you said about like it's a necessity. And I really like the pie analogy, seeing like what goes on during your day. And I think, especially among teens, they might see that technology is a really big thing that's taking up a lot of their day. So I was going to ask you, like, how does technology, I guess, the use of smartphones and social media impact teen sleep patterns, and what have you seen with that? Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't talk about sleep, certainly in mental health, without talking about tech. I mean, it is all so intertwined. And tech is just so intertwined in all of our lives. It's an issue adults struggle with too. I mean, it's not just teens.
sure. Yeah.
But it is a very different landscape than it was, say, when I was in school. Um, but things like doing your homework, you're doing it online for starters. Your textbooks, your readings may be online. You're turning in assignments online. So it's not like you can say, oh, I'm just not going to be on tech at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a piece of it. But then there is the piece, and that then gets into things like overscheduling, because if you're not even sitting down to start your homework until 9:30 at night, and then you're on the computer until late at night, like that can affect your sleep. But then there's also sort of the social media piece, the more elective use of
Right.
tech,
Yeah.
um, and that too can impact sleep. There's actually three specific ways that tech can impact your sleep. The first is just if you're online until super late at night, you at some point are literally cutting into the time when you could have been sleeping. So there's
Yeah.
that time displacement factor. You're up until 1 or 2 a.m. Maybe you're not doing homework, maybe you're playing video games, but literally you could have been asleep. So like that's one way. The second way, though, is that most of the time, whatever it is you're doing online is stimulating and engaging. So
Hmm.
again, a video game, that is not soothing you to help you drift off to
Right.
sleep. Being involved in, Snapchat or something with a friend, going over, relationship issues, whatever it is, like that is not soothing and helping you drift off to sleep
Sure.
either.
Yeah.
Doing your homework online certainly is not soothing, so all that stuff is keeping your brain awake, and it's not like you can just turn off your computer and expect your brain to turn off too. And then the last piece, which is actually third in that list in terms of how much it, the potential, because really it's the time displacement and the, being engaged aspect. But the third piece is the blue light,
Hmm.
because all these backlit screens do emit blue light. It's part of the LED screens.
Right.
Um, and that is great, during the day. Blue light is what helps you feel alert. But getting additional doses of blue light from your screen at night is not what you want, because you don't want to feel more alert. And what happens actually is the blue light has the potential to delay the release of melatonin
Right.
even later. Again, the hormone that primes you to feel sleepy. So if you've been on your screen and you're sitting really close to a big screen like I am right now, and you do that until midnight, you've also then potentially got that blue light that's going to make it harder for you to
Sure.
finally feel sleepy. So there's all that. Those are all the potential ways. Um, and obviously you can't just say, okay, I'm doing this, throw my phone out the window. I mean, it
Yeah.
would be simpler, I have to say. You've probably not grown up always with phones. I mean, like there was actually a time before phones. They're not going to go away, obviously. Some people go back to flip phones, like that is one strategy. But in terms of what's a realistic strategy on a daily basis, the best practices are get off of your tech, get off your devices an hour before bedtime. So those are
Yeah.
the official recommendations of the American Academy of Pediatrics. That being said, that is not always super realistic, but I think it's important to know that's actually the recommendation. So maybe you can't get off an hour early, but maybe you start working towards that. Maybe you can get off a half hour before bedtime,
Yeah.
So that's something. Um, the other best practice, and again, it's hard to implement if you haven't done it, but then you just do it and you're like, oh, okay, I can manage that, which is take your phone out of your bedroom at night.
Yep. I completely.
And that's one of those things everyone gets so used to. Oh, it's my alarm clock. Well, guess what? They still make alarm clocks. Um, and you can charge your phone somewhere that's not right by your bed. So that's another best practice. Have a central charging station somewhere. Part of this, though, also is ideally having this be a family environment. So it's not just on the teen to suddenly say, okay, now I'm going to do this. Like if
Hmm.
the whole family charges their phones in the kitchen, and that's always been a house rule, it's a lot easier to just kind of keep doing that as you get into high school.
Right.
So things like that, and just sort of trying to be mindful of the potential impact of tech, and trying to be mindful of limiting it before bed. And instead, and this is another thing we can talk about if we have time, instead of being on tech until the second you turn off the light, doing some kind of a wind down routine.
Yeah.
So, and ideally that's not tech, although I mean, it could be like listening to music, I suppose, but it's, you know, reading a book would be great. Some people like to take a warm bath, some people like to meditate, some people like to color, but like something where you've gotten off your device and you're actually doing something that helps relax you. And I know sometimes scrolling can be relaxing, but you still have that blue light. And
Yeah,
then
for
there's
sure.
also the potential that you never know what you're going to see. And all of a sudden you may stumble upon something that's not relaxing.
Yeah.
Not going to find that if you're coloring.
Right. Yeah, I do think that routine part is really important to kind of get your body used to and your brain used to, oh, this is something that's associated with sleep and it's time to go to sleep soon. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's something that, I don't know if you have parents who may be watching this, but if so, it's going to harken back to what they did when their kids were little. Because when you do have a 2-year-old, you do have a very set, established bedtime routine. And it's, it happens at the same time every night, ideally. And it's the same set of steps, reading a book and, things like that. That sense of having this set series of steps you go through, this routine, is really powerful. It
Right.
works not just for little kids, it works for teens, it works for adults too. So this whole
Sure.
idea of a wind down routine is great for any age because it does help prime you. Your brain is like, oh, okay, now we're in wind down, mode. I know what comes next is sleep. Like it really does help with
Sure.
easing that transition from being super productive and on to wanting to be asleep.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Those are all my questions I have for today. So I don't know if you want to add anything that you really wanted to share with the audience, same thing that maybe they want to, one last message you want them to leave off with, or yeah, if there's anything else you want to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I have found, and again, looking at, excuse me, if there are adults listening to this as well, to the extent that sleep can be a family priority, I think that that is really powerful because a lot of adults out there are sleep deprived too. Teens are more sleep deprived often because of all these academic demands and the school start time, et cetera, but adults are too. So making sleep a family priority, it can be really powerful. It works, for adults and teens alike. When you wake up and you've had a good night's sleep, you're starting with a full tank, everything just feels so much more positive. As an adult, you're going to get along better with your teens. As a teen, you're going to get along better with your parents. I mean, like it just makes everything go that much more smoothly. So I think just trying to make sleep a priority
Mhm.
and not let it get lost in the shuffle. That's sort of, I view myself as kind of the advocate for that little piece of the
Right.
pie, that sleep piece that so often gets overlooked. And so when you think about what you need to be doing, I need to take that one extra class. Well, what you need is to also give yourself enough time to rejuvenate, to be able to sleep so that you can do all of this stuff better. And
Okay.
that's across the board, whether it's your grades or your sports performance, whether you're out there driving, if you're driving on the road early in the morning, you haven't got enough sleep, that's dangerous.
For
So
sure.
all these things you're going to do better with a good night's sleep. And so keeping that in mind as you're planning your schedule. And if you find that things have gotten out of balance, trying to take steps to rebalance that a little bit, recognizing that sleep is going to help you do all these other things that you're trying to do, and you're going to feel better too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really love that message. Well, again, thank you for so much for coming on here. I'm sure our viewers are just as grateful as I am for you to come on here. I'll make sure to link everything you mentioned down below. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for tuning into the REM Reward Podcast. Before you go, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for our next podcast where we will be joined by a special guest speaker to explore even more about the fascinating world of sleep and psychology.